Now, the other huge story with this that you've seen circulating across the Western media is Xi Jinping's victory. So he is now elected again for a third term, and this has been called unprecedented. Oh my God, China is under complete and utter dictatorial rule that the the Chinese people can't get out of, and Xi Jinping is just asserting his power and dominating, and it's terrible, and we should all hate Xi Jinping. I'm going to show you what CNN had to say about Xi Jinping's victory. I only have to read the first couple of lines. So Xi Jinping secures unprecedented third term as China's president in ceremonial vote. So this is how they talk about China, right? It's ceremonial. It's not legitimate. So Xi Jinping's unprecedented third term as China's president was officially endorsed by the country's political elite on Friday. Hold on one second. So it was yesterday. Solidifying his control and making him the longest-serving head of state of the communist China since its founding in 1949. Xi was reappointed Friday as president for another 5 years by China's rubber stamp legislature in a ceremonial vote in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, a highly choreographed exercise in political theater meant to demonstrate the legitimacy and unity of the ruling elite. So essentially what they're saying is that it's not legitimate. It's a rubber stamp, and it's ceremonial, meaning that it has no meaning that there was a vote between over 2,900 deputies and delegates, that it's meaningless, right? Delegitimizing. That's what CNN was trying to do. That's what the whole Western corporate media was trying to do here. Delegitimize the Chinese political process. But nonetheless, Xi Jinping is president for a third term. And this is very significant because it demonstrates just how legitimate his leadership actually is. So if you want to understand China, you actually have to understand how China does politics. So let me just pull up an infographic really quickly just to show you how China does its politics. And this was in the Global Times, which is Chinese media, yes. But the Global Times has these helpful infographics, which are not a factual. This is how China elects deputies to people's congresses. And so when you look at the provincial deputies electing national deputies, oops, sorry about that. So let's look at this 5-level electoral system. It starts from the township and county levels. So voters directly elect township, county, and county deputies. And then those deputies elect the municipal. Those deputies in the city elect provincial, and then the provincial elect the National People's Congress deputies. So those are the 2,962. They represent what the provincial deputies all across China elected, who they elected. And of course, this is more of a direct democracy model rather than representative, because what it is rather than voting for all of it, rather than voting for your mayor as just an individual person, rather than voting for your your governor, what you have is you have 5-year terms. All deputies are democratically elected with a term of 5 years. All of them serve 5 years. And that's where you have people cycling in and out from, let's say, townships. At the township level, village level, you have people electing the next level at the county to the city. And there's a rotational there's leadership development. There's people moving up. There's people trying their hand at higher levels of government. There's a lot of emphasis and focus on the quality of leadership. And so it's a more direct democracy model, believe it or not, because that's literally the structure of what direct democracy is. It's not direct democracy isn't, oh, you just vote for one representative and you just vote for your representative everywhere. No, it's about building leadership structures through democratic elections at every level. So that's how China does, and that's what the National People's Congress is. The National People's Congress is the top representatives, right? The most experienced and high-level representatives at the government level, and they do then elect someone like Xi Jinping as the president, and they did. And why would they? Well, there's many reasons why they would do such a thing. And I'm going to show you just what China came up with, okay, in terms of major targets in 2023. And the reason why they're able to meet these targets. And I also want to show a video that I need to actually pull up now because it shows the achievements that China has been able to win over the course of of Xi Jinping's leadership, which demonstrate there would be um, why there would be so much support for Xi Jinping. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So hold on, let me just pull up first the video of the achievements, and then I'm going to show you the targets. Okay, so here we go. So here's a video that shows you 5 years, 100 seconds, a look back at China's achievements. This was posted in China Daily. All right. So here's the video. I'm just going to pause it and big screen it. So here's what China has achieved in the last 5 years, 100 seconds, looking back at China's achievements. Here we go. So you get the picture, right? China has alleviated extreme poverty, has eradicated extreme poverty. It is now alleviating relative poverty. China has this huge high-speed rail network. Much of it has been built during the Xi era, during the era of Xi's leadership. It started around 2008. That was the first high-speed rail line in China, but now it has taken off with more than 30,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. You have renewable energy in every home at this point. You have food security. You have life expectancy rising. You have business booming, industry booming, high tech booming. You have so much going right inside of China. What gives anyone, CNN or anyone else, the right to question whether Xi Jinping should be the leader when you have leaders like Joe Biden getting into victory lists and complete and utter absurdities in Ukraine, right? Sparking and fueling and intensifying the threat of World War III, saber rattling with China all along the way, and spending and approving of $800+ billion in military aid while people in East Palestine don't have what they need. They're being basically poisoned by a train derailment. You have train derailments happening multiple times per year, right? Dozens of times per year. Mass shootings. You have massive instability in the United States, and yet you have U.S. and collective West media, mainstream media, corporate media, lecturing China about how this is a rubber stamp for China. Xi Jinping is just a rubber stamped president, and it's all just ceremonial. It's just like one little party, and it doesn't really have any legitimacy because guess what? China's politics are illegitimate. Well, the world begs to differ. The world begs to differ because the world is looking at the goals, not just what China has achieved, but what China is aiming for. And here you have major targets for China in 2023 already deliberated and agreed upon at the two sessions. And actually, these are quite modest, and I'll tell you why. So the GDP growth target is around 5% for 2023. Now you have Deutsche Bank, you have a lot of Western financial institutions saying, well, China's recovery is actually quite immense right now. And in fact, China may grow 6%, maybe even more. So this is actually quite modest in GDP terms, but yet it is actually double, if not triple, if not for a lot of European countries, it'll be 5 times as large because a lot of European countries are not going to be growing at all in 2023. The consumer price index, the measurement of inflation at 3%, which is also quite modest because, as you might have seen recently in the Collective West media, there's been a lot of pearl clutching around the fact that in February of 2023, China's consumer price index was 1%. Now, I don't know if you have been to a supermarket or been shopping lately, but let's just say that in the United States, in the Collective West, there's nothing that you can buy right now where the consumer price index year on year is 1%. It's 3, 5, 7, 11, double digits. With rent, you can't even measure it because sometimes it's 200%, sometimes it's 20%, but it's a lot. So the consumer price index is actually this is modest for China, given that it's only had an inflation rate of about 1% in February 2023. And of course, the collective West media is now saying, well, China doesn't have enough inflation now. Its economic recovery isn't real because it doesn't have this inflation. So again, ridiculous, but that's what they're saying. So of course, you have 12 million jobs, urban jobs they want to create. They want a deficit to GDP ratio of 3%. And they want a grain output of over 650 million tons, which is about the same rate as last year. So that's what they are aiming for. Now, as I said, the way the Western corporate media has covered Xi Jinping's victory is utterly pathetic. It's utterly pathetic. It's arrogant. It's rife with anti-China, new Cold War hostility. It's completely and utterly dehumanizing. And it's all about asserting U.S. propaganda, U.S. hegemony via propaganda. That's what it is. That's all it is. And I want to show you what the BBC. So the BBC, well known for its anti-China bias, right? During the COVID pandemic, they showed these videos of lockdowns and grayscale kind of camera work after Wuhan reopened in April 2020. They have been notoriously promoting known liars and NGOs and proxies of the United States on issues like human rights in Xinjiang. The BBC is one of the most anti-China outlets. They actually were very close to having their presence in China revoked, especially when there was the Ofcom saga where the UK was banning, and they banned for a time CGTN's ability to broadcast in the UK. So here's the BBC now, and I want to show you. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the BBC had a little segment, a little clip. All right. Yeah, that's right. That's a real title. Is China's President Xi Jinping's double T a power move? And so you might think, what does that even mean? Well, you're about to find out because I want to show you this as an example of how absolutely pathetic the collective West has become as it tries to denigrate China for being a uncredible force for peace in Ukraine. It's not credible what they do. Everything that they do, whether internationally, is all about aggression. You know, they frame China as the most authoritarian country in the world. They frame China as everything and all that is bad in the world. And meanwhile, they're the one ramping up aggression in Taiwan, provoking World War III. It doesn't matter because they want your eyes glued to the most absurd stories. They are infusing a large dose of yellow peril into their propaganda so that you are unable to think critically at all about what they're doing in their foreign policy goals and their aggression toward China. So here we go. I want this is going to be very cringeworthy. So get ready.
Look and see if you can spot the difference between China's leader, Xi Jinping, and everyone else. He's got 2 teacups, and all the others have 1. It might seem like a minor detail, but in elite Chinese politics, symbolism matters. Chinese emperors used to be the only ones allowed to wear yellow robes. So even little things like having 2 cups set Xi Jinping apart. The 2 cups thing actually started back in 2021, but everyone thought it was just a COVID thing. Sometimes Xi Jinping's power is more overt, like at a big...
Before I move on, do you see how hard she's trying to speak proper Mandarin? Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping. Meanwhile, she's completely reading from a card that is so historically inaccurate. It's so laughable. And she's talking about Xi Jinping having 2 teacups being a power move. All right. And it only gets worse from here. Let me continue.
Communist Party meeting last October when his predecessor, Hu Jintao, was practically dragged away. We still don't know the backstory to that one.
Well, actually, if you were paying attention to anything that was coming out of China, we do. Hu Jintao was not well. He was not looking well. He was not feeling well, and he was escorted out. Hu Jintao is very much up there in terms of his medical condition and age, and he was just very nicely escorted out. And he finished. He did not stay out. He actually finished there and voted. That's what they don't tell you. He voted, on the government report and on what the People's Congress, the Communist Party Congress, the National Party Congress, the 20th, he voted back in October. So they don't even tell you that. This is what this BBC hack journalist won't tell you. But yet she's saying, oh, we don't even know the backstory of that. Well, that's because you're not paying attention. All you care about is smearing China for geopolitical ends. All you care about is the next war on China. Let's continue.
Since then, she's withstood rare COVID street protests.
BJP!
And he's...
Like, what? That's your footage of these protests? You mean the A1 revolution protests, which were literally sad, small protests that came out of the Hong Kong and Taiwan opposition movements that couldn't get anything off the ground and they were holding up blank sheets of paper? You think that was a threat to China's system, that Xi Jinping was shaking in his pants? No. China was not concerned about these protests. China lifted its COVID restrictions not because of the protests, even though you could argue that China has a more robust democracy because it actually responded policy-wise after these protests. But China was already slowly but surely discussing lifting the COVID protocols for economic recovery purposes. These protests arguably just gave them another reason to accelerate that when you have a population that has been quite concerned with COVID for a long time and has done very well. So if that's the footage that you have, that's the argument that you're making, it's, again, another sad one. Anyway, let's end this.
Still been powerful enough this week to push through major government reforms, all while showing in the smallest ways that he's in total control. Or maybe he's just really thirsty.
Or maybe he's just really thirsty. I mean, the music is laughable. Like, really? This is what you're putting out there? This is a serious post? This is a serious way to introduce your coverage of China's 2 sessions? This laughable music that you're trying to uncover some kind of mystery about 2 damn teacups? When the fact is that everything that you said in this video is completely inaccurate, from the so-called COVID protests to Hu Jintao. Everything was just inaccurate. And not only this, but it was rife. You saw it, right? The yellow peril connotations, the emperor, comparing Xi Jinping to an emperor. You think anyone in China compares Xi Jinping to an emperor? Absolutely not. Those were dark times back then. Those were semi-feudal times. Those are very impoverished times. And now, mind you, China is very much trying to reckon with its history, right? It has integrated a lot of politics like Confucianism, for example, into its overall national political discourse. But that is to say that no one in China is going to call Xi Jinping an emperor, because that's just downright offensive. Also, trying to liken two teacups to only the elite get to do certain things. Whose interest is it for for the Communist Party of China to project such a sad political posture, right? You'll never catch Xi Jinping pretending to drink poisoned water in Flint or East Palestine, like you saw. I think it was EPA officials in East Palestine, but you saw Barack Obama. You remember Barack Obama did that in Flint. So EPA officials so-called drinking poisoned water, faking that because you know it's fake. And then you also had Flint, right? You remember back during the Obama period, Barack Obama sipping the dirty water and saying, see, it's all fine. You'll never catch Xi Jinping doing that. Why? Because Xi Jinping is a legitimate leader in the eyes of the Chinese people, and doing that would make him an illegitimate leader in the eyes of the Chinese people. It can be that simple, guys. It can really be that simple. So we have to just, we got to take this all with a grain of salt. But here you have Xi Jinping winning another term. And yeah, I guess you could call it unprecedented in the sense that it hasn't happened before. But also, this moment in history has never happened before. Now more than ever, all countries need stable leaders and stable political leadership in order to navigate what are incredibly chaotic and dangerous waters globally. And China is no different. China, in fact, has huge stakes before it, in that it is being seen now, as I've said over and over again on this channel, it is being seen now as a global leader. It has to not just talk the talk, it has to walk the walk. Nations all over the world expect this. Nations have high praise for China all across Africa, Latin America, and Asia for its ability to adhere to very strict principles that are aligned with the UN Charter, as well as its commitment to trade and economic and diplomatic and political relations that do not seek to dominate, exploit, and destroy others. This is what the world expects of China, at least the world outside of the unhinged, warmongering blob that sits in the neocon establishment, the halls of the neocon establishment across the collective West in the United States. So China indeed needs strong leadership. It needs leadership that can be counted on. And that's what Xi Jinping is. That's objective. This isn't, oh, we got to love Xi Jinping for all of his politics. Xi Jinping's a communist. You may not agree with all of his politics, but if you listen to what Xi Jinping has to say, if you listen to how he talks to other world leaders, how he addresses global events, and how he serves the Chinese people, he is out there. Believe me, if East Palestine, something like that happened in China, he would be out there. When there are floods in China, he goes out and inspects the situation. And not only does he inspect, but he immediately, along with the Communist Party, immediately gets to work in rectifying the situation. Because China has a lot of inclement weather and issues like that, climate catastrophe. You'll never see neglect in that area, because neglect would be akin to neglecting the Chinese people. And that is something the Chinese people do not tolerate. So while you have Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden and Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak and all of these Western puppet leaders and puppets of the neocon foreign policy establishment neglecting their citizens, neglecting working people, destroying the lives of working people, sending all of their wealth and money to the biggest banks and military contractors. You'll never find China doing that. And that's why Xi Jinping is president for a third term. That's what they don't want to admit. They don't want to admit it because everything that China does at this point that's successful, whether it's political stability, whether it's successful brokering of peace agreements, like between Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? This huge diplomatic achievement, whether it's Ukraine peace plan, whether it's a Belt and Road Initiative, whether we can go on and on about China's role in the world. All of it is a reflection of what the United States cannot and will not do. It's a reflection of what the collective West cannot and will not do. So they have to, by extension, demonize everything that China does, even if you don't agree with how China does it. Because, of course, there's disputes and arguments. Some people think that China is stealing all the technology and is playing unfairly and all of this. I haven't seen definitive proof of that. And I think the proof of the global south embracing China is enough to show that, well, I wouldn't call 140 plus countries in the Belt and Road Initiative stupid. And I also wouldn't call them just, ideologically aligned with China. None of those things are true. So what that means is that there's obviously something honest and something robust and worthy of study and investigation that China is doing here that we should be paying attention to. So with all of that said, what does BBC, CNN, right, what the coverage of the two sessions has shown us is that the United States and the collective West is collapsing and China is rising, and Xi Jinping won because China won. China is winning. And this might seem hard to grasp for some. I know it's hard to grasp. I know it can really challenge everything that we have been told in the collective West about China, about Russia, about their role in the world. But the fact of the matter is that Xi Jinping's victory is a reflection of this global shift. His continued presidency in this time of turbulence, as China calls it, is a reflection of what can be done in this moment that can steer the ship forward for humanity on the right path, the correct path, what people need. People need stability. People need prosperity. People need infrastructure. People need peace. China stands on the right side of all of those questions in all of those respects. Not without contradictions, because guess what? China can't be, just like no country can be, perfect. It can't walk on sordid and poisoned waters and expect to be everything that those poisoned waters are not. No, it's got to swim in it. That was the reform and opening up period. That has been China's development. That has been there have been consequences. There remain challenges. China doesn't, this is what I always love, is that a lot of people think that China just talks itself up and doesn't say anything critical. Actually, China is more critical and changes more politically than any Western country that you can name. Over the last decade, China has changed more politically, more economically, has changed course more than any country in the West has. Most countries in the West have gone full steam ahead. Austerity, war, financialization, privatization, and the destruction of the economic base for the profits of Wall Street. That's been where the collective West has gone. There's been no shift in that. There really is no opposition to that beyond forces on the outside, people on the outside of the political establishment. And I mean really outside, not the Democrats, not the left Democrats. No, I mean really on the outside. Happens to be a lot of people, but nonetheless, they don't have political power. So you haven't had any political shift. But in China, you've had massive changes happen, even in just the last decade alone. Massive changes. You have massive economic changes, massive political changes. You've had changes in the constitution, changes in government priorities, changes in investment. You've had this change because while there are high principles like modern socialist country, modernization, etc., that and these have goals that are set, you also have a country that's more than willing, right, to try out and experiment and reform itself when the times call for it. And that's been I think, probably the biggest factor as why the Communist Party of China is so stable and so strong in its leadership in China, is because it is reliable and it's willing to change when it needs to. So if you're an average person, even if you're not in the Communist Party, there's about 93 million people, even if you're not in the Communist Party and you see this happening, you see new problems crop up, and then the government led by the party addresses it, right? Whether it's climate catastrophe, whether it's poverty alleviation, right? Whether it's food security, new problems crop up in these areas, and the government's addressing them. Well, what do you think about the government? You're gonna like the government because they address them, and usually the results work out in your favor. Not all the time. Sometimes, there's issues, whether it's trying to um, figure out how to rein in the housing industry, for example. Sometimes there are issues, but the government always tries to tackle those again and again until it gets it right. It consults with the people, and the people consult with their deputies. And then you have this policy change. You have real policy change. And that's why 90+% of Chinese people find the Chinese government to be legitimate and credible. And that's why they support it. And that's why you have, in contrast, less than half the people support the United States' president, Joe Biden, and even fewer supporting Congress, the media, etc. It's because people understand in the collective West, especially the United States, that their interests are never met and that any changes that happen are usually not going to benefit them. And that's the truth. So now we have a geopolitical moment where China is ascending. China is asserting global leadership. And also China is showing through the re-election of Xi Jinping that all of the stability that you need to assume this global leadership is there internally for China. And it has the collective West going absolutely insane. They're going mad. They're going mad because of it. You saw that BBC clip. It's just absolutely maddening. They cannot handle it. They're watching their power wane. They're watching their influence wane. They're watching all that they've stolen get taken back in a way that's fair, in a way that works for China, that works for the global South. And they just can't accept it. And so that's what's dangerous here. They're not going to accept it. They're going to continue to provoke, to escalate, to destroy. That is going to be the path forward for the collective West, led by the United States. And that is the one we have to be keeping our eye out as we pay attention to these developments, because you won't have most channels, most won't cover the 2 sessions. Most won't cover Xi Jinping's victory. Most won't cover China's achievements. But in order to understand geopolitics, you really have to understand what China's been doing in all respects. Because whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran and Saudi Arabia, this agreement, you can't understand all these developments without understanding Xi Jinping's victory.